For 20 years, China armed North Vietnam. Guns, rice, trucks, advisors. Beijing poured it all in to help defeat the Americans. They called each other comrades, brothers. And then, in 1979, just 4 years after that war ended, 200,000 Chinese troops poured across the border into Vietnam. The same Vietnam they had just spent 2 decades arming. Within weeks, tens of thousands were dead on both sides. So what happened? How do brothers in arms become enemies that fast? Follow this to the end because the answer isn't really about 1979. It's about something far older, and it explains why, even today, Vietnam can never fully trust its closest partner. Here's the first thing to understand. China's aid was never a gift. It was leverage. And the moment the war with America ended, that leverage stopped working because of a fight happening above Vietnam's head. By the 1960s, the two giants of the communist world, China and the Soviet Union, had turned on each other. They were rivals now. And little Vietnam had been clever. It took weapons from both and refused to pick a side. But once the country was reunified in 1975, Hanoi had to choose, and it chose Moscow. In 1978, Vietnam joined the Soviet economic bloc and signed a friendship treaty with the USSR, one with military clauses. To Beijing, this was a nightmare. A Soviet ally, armed and angry, sitting right on its southern border. The encirclement had begun. But a cold standoff doesn't start a war. Cambodia did. Next door to Vietnam, a regime had taken power so brutal it would murder nearly 2 million of its own people, the Khmer Rouge led by Pol Pot. And their single most important foreign backer was China. Now here's the problem. The Khmer Rouge kept launching raids across the border, massacring Vietnamese villages. So at the end of 1978, Vietnam invaded. In just 2 weeks, its army stormed into the capital, Phnom Penh, and wiped the Khmer Rouge from power, replacing them with a government loyal to Hanoi. Think about what that looked like from Beijing. Vietnam, the Soviet ally, had just destroyed China's ally and seized control of the heart of Indochina. For China, this was the line. Something had to be done. And there was one more wound, deeper and more personal. Inside Vietnam lived a large ethnic Chinese community, the Hoa, who had run much of the country's trade for generations. As Vietnam turned socialist and tensions rose, the Hoa were branded a security threat. Their businesses were seized. They were pushed out. By the end of 1979, around 250,000 of them had fled into China, many walking across the northern border with nothing. To Beijing, this was the persecution of its own kin. So China cut off every last aid program. And then it went further. On the 17th of February 1979, Deng Xiaoping sent 200,000 soldiers across the border to, in his words, teach Vietnam a lesson. For 1 brutal month, they fought. And when it was over, both sides claimed victory, and both buried tens of thousands of their own. So now, back to our question. How did brothers become enemies in 4 years? The truth is, they were never quite brothers. Because the thing 1979 really revealed is a pattern 2,000 years deep. For roughly 1,000 years, Vietnam was ruled by China, a province, not a partner. And the lesson Vietnam took from that millennium is simple. Accept China's help, yes, but never accept China's control. So when Beijing's aid came with the price tag of obedience, Vietnam did what it had always done. It took the help, and then it bowed to no one. The aid was never friendship. It was a bill. And in 1979, China came to collect. And if you think this is ancient history, look at today. China is now Vietnam's single largest trading partner. Their trade hit a record, somewhere around $260 billion. In late 2025, they broke ground together on a massive railway linking their two countries. On paper, the closest of partners. And yet, at the very same time, Vietnam is quietly racing to build military islands in the South China Sea, on reefs that China also claims, expanding them at a pace that rivals Beijing's own. Friendship on the surface, a standoff underneath. So the answer to everything, the 1979 war, the trade boom, the islands, is one single thing. Vietnam will take China's hand. It will trade, it will build, it will cooperate. But after 2,000 years, it will never, ever turn its back. That is the most honest place these two neighbours stand.